Thank you so much, Kelly. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human Powered and Society Embracing session of Transcending the Crisis virtual conference. My name is Denise DiPiano. I'm an HR leader and catalyst that values today's topics and integrates them in HR practices that respect human dignity and achieve business outcomes. I'm very excited about today's conversation as we explore, share, and learn from each other's perspectives, wisdom, and experiences. I'm very thrilled to have with us today Sara Robertson. Sara, welcome.
Hi, Denise. Lovely to see you again.
You as well. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I said I'm Sara Robertson, and as far as my professional activities, I founded an organization called Limehorse, which specializes in e-learning programs for continuing professional development, mostly in the areas of personal development topics, and that is focused on the legal profession. I'm also a faculty and advisory board member at the University of Toronto in their AMM Mind program. I developed and deliver a program in mindfulness and optimal performance there. I'm a peak performance consultant with Mindful Gateway Consulting, and I also hold a few different committee positions, but the one that I've been most engaged with lately is with the Mindfulness in Law Society, which is based primarily in the United States.
Excellent, very good, thank you. So I really appreciated your article, Antifragile is the New Resilient. But I will, and we'll certainly touch on that. But first I wanted to thank you for kind of stepping in at the last moment and taking Mr. Sayal here's slot. So I have to ask you, why did you accept his invitation?
Yeah, well, that's interesting because we got into when we chatted before previous conversation about this and how that aligned with sort of what my philosophy is, or the area that I practice from, as well as what was in the article, where it's, I think we need, part of becoming anti-fragile is looking for opportunities to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone. And so when this came up very last minute, and Sai had mentioned, he said, do you want to take this spot? And my initial reaction was this sort of resistance and anxiety, because it's like, I don't really have a lot of time to prepare. And oh my gosh, look at all of the other people that are contributing, and some, a little bit of imposter syndrome showed up there for me. And I realized it's like, this is really a good, opportunity for me to walk the walk, because one of the things that I mentioned in that article that I wrote was, that we're conditioned to avoid discomfort, which is, we're not necessarily looking to get rid of that, because that is an instinctual thing for us, but where becoming anti-fragile is really looking at opportunities to actively engage in practicing the opposite of that resistance, and in small ways too. Not practicing doesn't have to be these kind of like large scale, really necessarily really challenging situations. We surely are dealing with some of that right now, but I think part of building that that anti-fragile mindset or muscle is just taking all of these little opportunities to challenge those that conditioning or that instinctual reaction that we have.
Right. So in transparency, yes, we did have that conversation, and I said the same thing, that when Sai had asked me to do this, my first initial reaction was like, no, it's way out of my comfort zone, and no, and had to kind of do that saying like, okay, and then ask myself, what are you afraid of? And what I was afraid of was failing. And when I said that to you, you had asked me what the definition of a success or a failure is. So I will ask you what the definition of a success is for you.
Well, I think I already feel like I have a personal success in the fact that I made the commitment to show up. here today. And so it's interesting because what came out of that, you know, the conversation that we were having when it got into saying like, what is a success and what is a failure is, you know, this is sort of like the slaying the dragons part of you know, being in discomfort is shining a light on what those things are. Because I think like the experience that I have, you know, what I know from how we deal with our inner critic and that type of thing is that it tends to be sort of like this voice that whispers quietly, like, well, what if you fail? What if they don't like you? And we put up this resistance without really taking the time to kind of step back and take a view of the situation, say like, okay, what does that actually mean? Because when you and I broke it down, it said, okay, well, like, what does failure look like? And it was like, what is it? Some people don't like it. All people don't like it. What exactly is that? And to find how is a really, really helpful exercise for me is to break down, you know, kind of like what is success? What is failure? What does the failure look like? Really exploring that and seeing like, okay, is this something that is this enough to motivate me to avoid this situation? And in most cases, it's a narrative that I've created rather than an actuality that I can't live with. And if you don't mind me using it, the example that you had come up with was like, well, you know, a success for me is people get value out of this, and a failure would be, you know, if no one gets any value. And we talked about it, and I said, like, really, like, if you think about it, like, what do you think the probability is that not one single person who's on this call is going to get any value? And at the very least, even if they don't, I mean, there's value I see it in finding out that there are things that are not for me, because then I know, I mean, that helps me with narrowing my decision making. If I show up to something and I'm like, yeah, you know what, that I didn't really get any value out of that. I mean, it sounds a bit kind of contradictory, but the value in that is that I learned that that's not something that I value. So I don't need to put effort into doing it again.
Yeah. It's like, you know, taking a class in pottery making, and you think that you want to do that, and then you do it and you go, oh, that's not for me. It's the same kind of thing.
I actually love pottery making.
Of course, the one thing that I would pick, you would be like, no, yeah, that's the
right. But that's okay. We don't have to have values in that regard. So that's what makes us unique and wonderful.
Absolutely. So we kind of touched on it, and you touched on it definitely in your in the article about failure. So can you talk about failure, and, you know, because you talk about it from lawyers' perspective, or talking about it in the context of lawyers, because I think it's really powerful just in terms of how you deal with that and setting that up.
Yeah, I think because, I mean, one thing that's challenging about lawyers and legal profession is you have sort of this, like the individuals that have a tendency towards perfectionism, and then sort of a system that is kind of supports that drive towards perfectionism, because, you know, failure, it can have extreme consequences. The unfortunate side effect of that, though, is that it ends up driving an unwillingness to sort of take ownership or responsibility in some cases for failure, or an avoidance of some of the opportunities for growth that can come out of failure, that can actually contribute to improving the systems as a whole. So when, you know, we have a situation where you associate failure with the individual in such a way that it is sort of a persecution or blame based attribution, then the one of the results of that is that people become reluctant to be open and transparent about either their own choices or conduct or behavior that maybe resulted in something that was undesirable, and it creates, you know, this cycle of lack of, you know, improvement and sort of systemic dysfunction, because we're not if every time someone comes up and says, look, like I here's something that happened, I realized that I was either, you know, not trained well enough for this, or an area that I made a decision that was not the best one, and we come out on a witch hunt with, you know, torches and pitchforks, then that's creating an environment or a culture where we're not going to have that, you know, openness into looking at, you know, how we can have the system or organization or institution be in a growth position. So that was sort of what I had come on with this within the article, and I said we really need to, and so this is where like we really need to look into how we can create sort of culture within systems and organizations where people feel like there is a willingness in the collective to find solutions and to be forward motivated on making things better, rather than being in a judgment, persecutorial or blame based structure.
To me, when you're talking, what I keep on hearing in my head is trust, right? You're trusting that someone is, whether it's one person, a group, that there's a trust level that you're not going to, prosecute me for an idea or for a failure, but really kind of have an open conversation to seek to understand what worked and what didn't work, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So you talked about success for high or successful or high performing functioning means kind of comfortable in a false premise or false narrative. Can you talk a little bit about that?
As far as sort of how we're defining
just high functioning. So from an HR perspective, and when I would talk to people and they would come in and they would say, I want to get to X level. And when I would sometimes have conversations with them, it was like, well, that means that I've made it, or I don't have to continue learning, or I don't have to continue growing, or I don't have to put myself in these really uncomfortable situations to give a presentation in front of, the vice president or the steering committee. And I've heard you say that that's kind of like this false premise. So I just think it's an interesting, from an HR person, that really caught my ears.
So I feel like, that's, and where that becomes sort of a fragile mindset is this idea that there's sort of some end that we're getting to. And, the challenge with what you're talking about as an HR professional, where we have people that are coming in and they're looking really focused on like how they're going to drive their professional growth, which there's nothing wrong with wanting to be able to drive your professional growth. But when that's isolated from your personal growth, I think that becomes problematic, because it's looking at this sort of like, I'll do this until I'll do this so long until I get these external needs that I think are going to satisfy me met, and then I want to be done. So when you look at tying this sort of with your personal development, and what becomes more anti-fragile is someone who's looking from a personal development standpoint that ties along with their professional development is going to say like, well, no, I want to be challenged in such a way that like I'm doing these more difficult things, or I'm, engaging in these presentations, and so really being able to look at that from like a growth and learning opportunity. Is there's like a personal growth aspect, and I think like they're really well connected, because when you're embracing that personal growth part, it's going to drive your professional growth. And then the professional growth sort of metrics or whatever measures you're using become less important when there's this other personal growth area that you're working on. And I think it benefits an organization as well, because when you have an organization, when you have a bunch of people that are really like their focus is self-focused, like solely on their professional growth, then that's when you start getting people who are unwilling, become really rigid, they're guarding their perch, that sort of thing, where they're not able to kind of separate like how, when they're in their personal growth space, that they can look at how that contributes to like organizational growth outside of just kind of like protecting their territory.
Yeah, I when I work with clients now, and we kind of go through change and transformation, it's not either or, it's both. If you're not changing yourself, then the transformation is going to be a failure within the constraints of the organization, because you have to change. I mean, it's not, oh, I can, inside these four walls, I'm going to be this way. And then once I walk outside those four walls, I'm going to be something different. It doesn't really kind of like work like that. And I find that it's really interesting that so many people, like when I work with them, that they don't make that connection. It doesn't click for them. It's really.
And so then, I mean, that's an opportunity when you start looking at organizations and recruitment is, how much of your recruitment is looking to what that person's growth mindset or how committed they are to their personal growth, in addition to, all of the other components that you might look at in recruiting for any position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a question. Can Sara offer a concrete example of personal development?
So, I mean, personal development, one of the ones that I think is extremely important when we're getting into being more anti-fragile, and especially in the state that our world is in right now, is emotional literacy and emotional regulation. Being able to regulate your emotions, I think, is one of the single most important personal development tools that you can have, or areas of your person that you can develop in order to be able to engage in all of these things that we're talking about, doing things that are outside of our comfort zone, embracing, engaging in more challenges, both personally and professionally, being able to recognize, identify, and manage your emotions so that, you're not getting yanked around by emotional reactivity, and being able to effectively respond would probably be one of the number one things. And one of the reasons why I do come from, mindfulness training background, and why I look to mindfulness practice for this, is because two of the foundational areas of emotional intelligence are increasing self-awareness and accurate self-assessment. And having a self-reflective practice like mindfulness is one of the most effective ways to garner that sort of personal or self-awareness.
So interesting. So when you talk about self-regulation, and the emotions, for me, when I'm listening to that, I would have to self-regulate up and down, because there's times when I know that I'm really hyper and I have to bring it down, and then there's other times when I kind of need to raise it up a little bit more. So I just think that that's interesting as well.
So there's a flexibility in there, so you can be, if you're sort of feeling really activated, being able to downregulate, and if you're feeling and you need to upregulate as well, like if you need to get yourself ramped up to be part on doing a presentation or there's all of those sorts of things. And I mean, I want to be really clear, I'm not talking about numbing emotions or removing emotions or anything like that. I mean, emotions are having them and recognizing them and using them for the utility that they present in the time that they're there is what being able to regulate emotions looks like.
Right. Because I think sometimes we get into that mindset of we have to be so careful about comfort or saying something to someone that it actually makes us more fragile than anti-fragile. Because we're not having a healthy, robust conversation. We're really kind of going in and being, I can't say that to Sara, I don't want to hurt her feelings, and that's not helping anything, and it's counterintuitive to everything that we've been talking about all day.
Yes.
So you had said accurate self-awareness. So I could be self-aware but not necessarily accurate. So that was a key word to me. How do I get accurate self-awareness?
So accurate self-assessment is always going to be a work in progress. I mean, that self-assessment. And so I think when we're looking at starting with the self-awareness, becoming aware of, your thoughts, you are not your thoughts, you have thoughts, your thoughts, the nature of your thoughts, how that influences your behavior, what kind of emotions contribute to that. And it's like when we're just when we're not doing that, then we're operating on this sort of autopilot. And so when we're operating on an autopilot, like there's not an opportunity to take in the self-awareness is kind of like collecting all of this data and then being able to, over a period of time, look at this data that we've collected and make some assessments on what that means is how we're operating as a human being, and whether that's in alignment with our values, how we want to be interacting with other people. And so, and another opportunity to that too is to be able to separate a little bit from the ego portion or attachment portion, and to be asking people that are close around you, like, I noticed this about myself. What do you think about this?
It's interesting because company that I worked with, they had some layoffs, and the outside company that they used for to help their folks get through the layoffs, it was an exercise of asking people that both professionally and personally to kind of give you three words to describe you. And it was really just an interesting exercise when people came back. And one of my friends had reached out to me and said, "Can you give 3 words about myself?" And it just is that, how she, like, some of the responses were just like, "Oh, really? That's how you perceive me?" Like, it's the perception of, that's not how I perceive myself, or that's not how I want to be perceived. So it was a really interesting exercise that I think everyone can do to just kind of help them get that. So I think we might have, one question. How can organizations facilitate emotional literacy or facilitate emotional regulation, especially in context of teams?
So I think, getting into some opportunities for emotional intelligence training is important. I've always felt that something like personal development is best started with the individual and then brought into team development afterwards, where you've got a group of people coming in at least with some foundational knowledge of what emotional intelligence or emotional literacy is. Having a solid leadership in this regard is important. The interesting thing is, it'll be funny to use the word contagion, considering that we're in the middle of a pandemic, but there is a phenomenon known as emotional contagion. And so if you have a leader that is demonstrating the energetic level or emotional level that you want from your team, then there is, the individuals are going to absorb that energy and mimic it. That's what we do. Like, as human beings, we could get into the neurophysiology of that if we had more time. But essentially, if you have an experience, maybe think about an experience you've had with someone where they were really, really elevated or really activated, like just angry, and what that does to your physical state. I know when I'm with someone like that, I feel activated, I feel stressed, and you start to feel or empathize physically with that anger that they have, but it works in the reverse as well. So when you have a leader that has done the work to really hone their skills to emotionally emotionally regulate, then that is going to translate into their team environment as well, just by this phenomenon of emotional contagion.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes you can feel the energy that someone brings into the room, and then you can also feel or the negativity that someone brings into the room. Right? You're like in a meeting and you feel like everyone's up, and then this person comes in and there's like this weight that walks in the room, and you're like, and then and everyone just goes, whew, like it's palpable.
Yeah, and that gets down to the trust thing too. Like, you can feel that in the opposite way too. If you have a crisis going on and everyone in the room is anxious and nervous, and you have, your leader walks in and they're like Chicken Little, and it's like the sky is falling and everything's and that it's just creates this increase in that sort of activation. Whereas if you have, someone in leadership who's done this work, who can walk in and be like, okay, guys, like, here's what we're going to talk about here. And it just, that's what I'm speaking about when I'm talking about, you know, leaders being able to use their ability of emotional regulation to create the emotional atmosphere that they're looking for in their teams.
Great. So we have about 5 minutes left, believe it or not. I know it went by so fast, right? So can you share with us one thing starting from today that people can action as first steps towards embracing antifragility in their personal and professional lives?
The first thing that I would do is take an opportunity, and this is where we get in, is to practice building self-awareness. And a welcome way to do that in the conditions that we're in the world right now is to just try sitting a little bit longer in discomfort that you're experiencing, and noticing what sort of sensations you have, what that feels like. Because we live in a world that really is driven towards distractibility from uncomfortable feelings, and being able to sort of build that practice, or that strengthen that muscle of being able to just be uncomfortable for a period of time is going to create the foundation that you need to be able to, you know, look at being more self-aware and accurately self-assess. So that would sort of be the first thing that I would look towards. Another thing in building anti-fragility would be to look for ways to diversify your activities. So trying different things to foster some productive discomfort in your life, and along with that, having routines as an anchor, I think, is really, really important. Building the confidence to be able to lean into things that are difficult is a lot easier when you have routines in place that can act as an anchor for you. And I guess the last thing that I'm really hopeful for both individuals and organizations and society as a whole with this is to resist the urge to head back to the status quo. I think the most disappointing thing that I could see come out of this experience that we're having right now is that we learn nothing.
Yeah, I agree. That's my concern. I think I was on another panel and they'd asked, and that was like that we're going to forget everything that we learned here and just go back to the way that it was. And I don't know that in some things, I think that we're not going to be able to do that, but in a larger setting, I think that it's very easy to be able to do that again, because most people don't want to be in that comfortable situation. So it's just much easier to gravitate back to what we know. We are creatures of habit after all.
Absolutely.
So
yeah,
it's just easier to do that. So is there anything else we have? Maybe let me just see if there's any other questions before.
2 minutes left.
Yeah. So love the emotional contagion. That was a popular one. I do love that. That's a great concept. I think that was it. So I don't see any other questions, but if anyone's out there that has any questions or comments, please share with us. We're really happy to bring them up.
You know, we've got 2 minutes left here. Why don't we do a tactical breathing exercise?
Great.
So this is a tool that I use. It can be known as square breathing, box breathing, tactical breathing. Tactical breathing because it's used in the military to increase focus, but it's a tool that's really, really good for being able to down-regulate your nervous system in periods of high activation. So I use this when I'm really activated and I need to be able to kind of bring my energy down. And so we're going to breathe in for 4 minutes, breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and then hold again for 4 seconds. So I think we can do about 60 seconds of this. So breathing in,
okay.
Holding for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, exhale for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and holding for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. And so we're at 2:00.
Love it.
Yes.
That was great. I needed that. I needed that for in the beginning, Sarah. I'm calm now.
You can do it. It's great because it's, eyes closed, eyes open, as long as duration as you want. But that's one of my go-tos when I need a quick.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Bring me back.
This was I so enjoyed our conversations today and leading up to today. So thank you again for jumping in at the last minute and for all of your insights. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks. Thank you, Denise.
All right.